Good morning, everyone, and welcome in. My name is Tiana Lyons King, and I am CAM's Community Engagement Manager. Thank you all for joining us today as part of our first session of 2024 Centering Equity Workshop Series. As we begin this event, we want to acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. California is home to over 150 tribes, and an acknowledgement is just one step towards working with Native communities to build meaningful relationships. Museums and many institutions were founded upon purposeful exclusions and erasures of Indigenous people and still benefit from settler colonialism and associated harms. CAM is committed to moving beyond land acknowledgement and into action. We encourage you to find out more about the tribes in your areas and find ways to celebrate and support them. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay people here in San Diego, California. I will be popping a link in the chat for everyone on nativeland.ca. It's a helpful but not definitive resource to learn more about the tribes in your area. As we proceed today, I'd just like to go over some centering equity housekeeping. Just for everyone's information, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted to CAM's YouTube. All of you will receive a link via email once it is uploaded to the website. Our workshops are a space for learning and collaboration, so we ask that you respect yourself as well as others in the room and our instructor today. The chat box will be open throughout the entirety of the session. You're able to interact with folks who are here in that space and ask any questions. We will be asking and addressing those questions at the end of our session today. And if you'd like to ask a question on an anonymous basis, I would be happy to answer or ask that question on your behalf. You can just send me a direct message via the chat box, and I will do that for you. If you have any technical issues, you can just message me in the chat box, or you can email me at engagement@calmuseums.org. I'll also put my email in the chat for you all to have for your convenience. With that, I am actually going to pass it over to our instructor today, Jessica Denise Dixon. Our session is Power Dynamics. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today, this morning. And I wanted to open up with one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. It feels appropriate. MLK Day is coming up. Also, my mom's birthday is coming up, and she shared a birthday with Martin Luther King Jr. So shout out to my mom who passed away last year. So it was my first year without her on her birthday. And so everything just feels really tender and precious about that right now. But one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. is, "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love." I'm going to repeat it. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Now, before you're like, why are we talking about love at work? We're at work, like what's going on? I do want us to just pause. I want us to take a few moments to get present. So you can close your eyes if you'd like. If you don't want to do that, maybe you just soften your eye gaze. Just kind of take a moment, put your pen down, stop playing games on your phone, whatever, and just be in this moment. Just be here. Feel free to turn your screen off if you'd like and keep it on if you'd like. And for a second, just breathe. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose if that's accessible to you. Breathe all the way deep into your belly, feeling your belly expand. Exhaling through your mouth. Another deep breath, maybe taking in a little bit more air, seeing how that feels. Noticing the temperature of the air as it enters. Noticing your body softening as you exhale. And one more deep breath in. Oh. Now, thank you. We're going to talk about power, and power brings up a lot of stuff. So if you feel anything during this that feels overwhelming, I want you to remember that you can always come back to your breath. My name is Jessica Denise Dixon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently also reside on the unceded land of the Kumeyaay Nation in what is colonially known as San Diego, California. And I'm really happy to be here with you. I run a coaching and consulting business where I do work at the intersections of the Enneagram, anti-racism, and embodiment. So understanding that our nervous system plays a big part in how we move in the world. And so presence practices help us regulate our nervous system, especially when we're going to talk about things that can feel intense, like power. The reason that I like that MLK quote is because I feel like it really flips power on its head. Many of us have pictures that come to mind when we think of powerful people or when we think of power as it is exerted. But many of us haven't necessarily fully defined what power is. We have a sense of it, but we haven't necessarily defined it. So maybe true power is really love implementing justice. Maybe that's the power that we should aspire to. So let's just dive in because like we have a lot to cover and I'm really excited. Okay. So power, I feel like it's like leadership, where often we have, if you ask all the people who are on this call, almost everyone's probably going to have like a different definition of leadership. I think power is very similar. But one definition of power, and the one that we'll go with, is that power is the ability to command or control, to exercise authority and influence. And how we see power play out is maybe actually even more important than how it's defined, right? Definitions do matter, but often we know when we see power used well, and we often know when it's not being used well. And sometimes we don't have language for when it's not being used well, but it's like a sense that we have in our body. You know, power can give us a lot of feelings in our body, feeling hurt by something, being stepped over, feeling betrayed. Also, it can leave us feeling inspired. And so, one of the important things about power dynamics is that they're always impacting us all the time without us consciously thinking about it. So, we all have personal and societal ideals about who should have power. And this is evidenced by things like who has been allowed to be president, who has been elected. And also, even using that example of like the ways that women who run for president are harsh or are judged more harshly than the men who run for president. And they're judged for different things. She's cold, where men can be cold, they can be, you know, off-putting, but a woman who is not seen as fit. But then women are also too emotional, right? So these things are often unconscious to us. They're often just below the surface. There are also unspoken ideals about who should hold power in leadership positions, as well as who shouldn't, who's too lazy, too uneducated. It plays out in who we assume is in charge, you know, who we give interviews to when we're reviewing resumes for jobs. There's often unconscious bias around candidate names. So if you have a more ethnic sounding name, quote, ethnic sounding, maybe your resume is going to be more likely to be put to the side. My background is in higher education. When I was at the director level within residence life, I would have parents come and speak to me, and they would ask to speak to my boss because their assumption was that I was too young, too incompetent, too incapable of helping them. They'd ask to speak to the person in charge, thinking it was someone else. And I was like, hey, actually, it's me. Now, I was youthful, I was cheerful, and I had positional power that I was very much qualified for. But their vision didn't match my presentation. So they dismissed me. Right now, if I showed up here dressed the way that I do with some of my one-on-one clients, it would probably skew your internal ideal about whether I was worthy of having influence over you. Even if the presentation was exactly the same, even if there were no changes in how I showed up and what I presented, even if I was dressed a little bit different, you'd be like, should I listen to her? Does she have credibility? So within this society, the most common power that we know of and think of is called power over. And this power is ultimately focused on control. Often with this kind of power, you see self-interest, domination, you can see coercion and force. Sometimes here you see motivation through fear. With power over, we see this belief that power is a finite resource, which means that some people can have it and others can't. And beyond that, some people should have it and other people definitely should not have it. Often with power over, there is a specific authority figure, and that often is white male or wealthy white male. And there can be, with this kind of power manipulation, there can be exploitation of the people who don't have this kind of power. Power over is usually where we see hierarchy play out. Now, hierarchy itself is not bad. If we were in a world that was centered on equity and justice and liberation, hierarchy would be really beautiful. The higher entity would use their power to support and care for those who are below them. But in this society, power over and hierarchy usually means I'm going to use my power and I'm going to use the people who are under me to get more power for myself, which is unfortunately really a lot of what we're taught to do, how we're taught to be. What we're taught is the right thing. Right? If you've been around long enough, you've heard things like climbing the corporate ladder or people talking about collateral damage within a company when something happens, which is really people. Collateral damage is people, people's lives being changed, people's lives being ruined. And so anytime that hierarchy is less about supporting everyone in the organization, and anytime it's more about how can I get up higher, how can I move up, it's really time to rethink our hierarchy. It's time to rethink our positions. It's time to rethink power, right? If up means more authority, more control, more power for me, less power for others, less autonomy for others, it's probably time to pivot. It's probably time to reimagine and to reshape how we're living, what our organizations look like. Now, it's really impossible to talk about power dynamics and power over or hierarchy even without talking about privilege. Now, sometimes people get squeamish, and like I said, come back to your breath if you get squeamish when I talk about privilege, but it's not some kind of boogeyman. Privilege is what arises when there is an inequitable society that favors some over others. So just take a deep breath and let's talk about it. Privilege is multifaceted. And on one hand, it's unearned favor or power or advantage that is ascribed to a specific person because of a specific identity. Now, it's not something that you earn or work for. It's society is like, oh, we value you. On the other hand, it also means that there are specific challenges, pardon me, that you won't face because you have a specific identity. And this doesn't mean people who have privilege never have any challenges, that they never have heartbreak or face hard things, right? All of those things are just part of being human. it's part of our human nature to face hard things and grief and betrayal, all those things. But it does mean that when you hold privileged identities, that there are barriers and challenges that come from inequities that you won't have to face. But because of the way that we are socialized, people with privilege are often taught or come to believe that everyone starts on an equal playing field, and that if others just work hard enough, they'll make it just like I did. Now, this creates blind spots. And that when I say blind spot, I mean things that you cannot see that other people can. They're very visible to other people. Sometimes people with privilege talk about being colorblind. I don't see color, but babies as early as 6 months perceive differences in skin color. Now, they learn what those differences mean from us, the explicit messages about those people, and by watching who gets punished, who gets promoted, who gets rewarded. Color blindness is a form of power denial, and it creates cognitive dissonance within the one who actually claims to be colorblind. Those who don't hold privileged identities are penalized for their identities in subtle ways and in systemic ways, in ways that play out within the systems within our society. Now, the identities that hold the most privilege right now are white people, males, people who are cisgender, upper middle to upper class, heterosexuals, able-bodied, Christian, English speaking, preferably with the US accent, and even more if you drill down into what kind of accent, middle-aged, US born. Now, you might not hold one of those identities, but you might pass for someone who does. For example, I have some chronic pain issues, but that's really imperceptible to most people. People don't know unless I tell you, so I really can pass for able-bodied. And when I do, this benefits me. It used to be that if you were lighter than a brown paper bag, that you were more likely to pass as white and therefore less likely to face the challenges that come from being Black in an anti-Black society. Now, passing is different from just presenting in a certain way, right? I have an acquaintance who very much looks white, but she's mixed. And she's very clear at letting people know that she's also Asian. She's not hiding it. It's not something that she's like, trying to shield from people. She just doesn't look like it, right? So passing and presenting as also offer privileged people. And again, the more layers of privilege you have, the more blind spots it creates. Privilege means that I have power where people who do not hold those identities do not have the same power. And power changes our brain. When we are socialized into our privileged identities, we internalize entitlement and advantage around those identities, which means we don't really think about them. We don't really question whether there's anything wrong or whether anyone else might be hurting because of this designation. Like my privilege means that someone else is marginalized, and I don't think about that because it's just the way things are. The cultural conversation around societal privilege is important because it stems from a few hundred years ago. Way back when, in the 1600s, there was a growing industry called slavery. And the more enslaved Africans were brought here, as more were brought here, race, as we know it, was created. There were different ways of holding race before, but race as we know it was created then. And so enslaved Africans were made Black so that powerful, wealthy white men could feed into this economic system. And they created laws to ensure control. Some of these laws included things like enslaved Black African men couldn't marry white women, or those wives would take on the status of their husband as slave. Babies born to Black women took on their mother's status as a slave, which I think really points to the brutality of slavery, because if women, if their fathers were already slaves, they would have already automatically also been slaves, right? So that shows a little bit of what was happening during that time. There were laws that literally prohibited Black people from learning to read. Black people couldn't travel without a permit, and it was even illegal to publicly assemble. So creating Black
So,
also racialize white people. And then the goal, came to become white because it was associated with power and wealth. Now, you might see how this contributes to work culture that we have now, right? It's normal to make decisions to hold on to power, to grasp for power, or to withhold power from others, right? If you don't honor the person with power over, you might lose your job. You might be demoted. You might be otherwise punished for something. Now, there are other subtle ways that fear motivates through being cut off from social connections that you may have been introduced to, or actually someone withholding information from you that could help you be more successful. I remember when I was first working at an institution and it was like opening weekend, and I was working in residence life, people are moving their students in, people are mad, some people are happy. It's just a lot of mixed emotions. And I was meeting with a parent. Another staff member had brought this parent over, and the staff member did nothing to prepare me. And so I was like blindsided by the concerns of this parent without any support at all. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting power play. Okay, cool. Interesting. Good to know. I learned a lot during that time. Now, over also motivates the person who has it to not make any missteps so they don't lose it. Or if they feel like they're going to lose it, to really, by any means necessary, hold on to it, which sometimes can come at the detriment to another person or other groups. Now, the issue with power over is who gets to be themselves? Who does? Who gets to be fully themselves? There's always identity power in the form of privilege and positional power at play. Now, what's interesting is what often wins out is privilege. Privilege even over positional power or hierarchy within an organization, meaning that often a white person who may be at a lower level is seen as having more credibility than people who have earned, Black people or people of color who have earned a higher position. We see Black women being pushed out of leadership positions because being Black and being a woman don't really hold much honor within society when it comes to leadership. I actually just learned from a friend. She's writing a book and she's been learning a lot about the publishing world. And I learned from her that development for women in books looks like self-help books, but development for men looks like leadership books, meaning most leadership books are written to men, by men, and for men. And women write books that are put in the self-help category, even if they're leadership books. It's rarer to see a woman in the leadership category. And I just feel like that's really interesting. We see power over displayed in situations like tone policing, where someone gets to decide that because another person, usually a marginalized person or someone who does not have the same positional power, didn't say things in a nice or professional enough way, putting quotes around both of those words, right? These are two things that are determined by the white people in power. And because they didn't say it in a specific way, we don't have to listen to them. We get to invalidate them, or they should be punished. We also see it in ideas like meritocracy, that because someone holds identities that have privilege or societal power, that they are by default the best person for the job or role or leadership. which often means the white male, especially if they're wealthy, is held as the most credible, even if they don't have the education or experience. Now, I'm sure there is a deep rabbit hole there, like that we could really go down around how leadership is framed within society, but I only have an hour before we get to our Q&A. Well, another half hour. But women aren't seen as natural leaders within the society. Too emotional, too whatever, add on Black or trans or another identity that is both perceptible and marginalized. And as a society, we are socialized to believe that they don't really have credibility. Now, this is like an overarching socialization that everyone faces. But if you don't have a marginalized identity and you don't come from a people who does, you really have to watch out for that even more. Because like I get messages all the time that women are not credible, Black women are not credible leaders. But I was raised by a Black woman who was an incredible leader at home and outside of the home. So at least I had that example that countered what was really true, where I'm like, oh, I get to question that thing that I was taught. I get to question that because I have this different kind of experience now. Now, an example of a good use of power over, because like I said, I think power is just power. And the way that we yield it, the way that we hold it, the ways that we move with it are what make a difference. But because often we're not talking about it, it's just unconscious and we just go with the flow. Now, think about power. You're in power at a company that you know is about to do layoffs. Not that any of you would leave. I'm sure you're all happy in your positions. But imagine, right? You're at the top. You know layoffs are coming. So instead of holding back that kind of information, holding back the information that would help people who would be most impacted, like maybe you actually like use your network to help people find employment elsewhere. Often one of the things that people don't think about as a resource is connections. Like your connections matter. So maybe you're intentional and proactive and you use your resources. You reach out to people at other companies and you say, I have these people and I know that we're about to have these layoffs. And so these are the people, this is what their credentials are. These are the ways that they've really supported this. Can you get them something? You know, power over can be used to create something beautiful, right? It can be used to really be responsible for the people who are beneath you instead of just them being kind of exploited. In that same situation, it can also be used for self-protection, where you withhold information, where you're vague, where you don't give people enough time to make important decisions for them to job search before they go, that kind of thing, right? People always dream of being the people who will handle power well. People dream about being leaders for the people, but this kind of leadership is a practice of using power well. And practice makes possible. I want to talk about other kinds of power because if power is really love doing justice, we might want to have other ways of thinking about power, especially in a culture that tells us that we should strive for power over and over and over again, right? We get those messages from a young age and over and over and over again. We're told that that is the kind of leader that we should be. That's the kind of power that we should want. But there are others that are often underlooked. And so I want to talk about three more. And the next is power with. This is shared power. And this is cultivated by relationships and by collaborations. This is power to the people. It's not just a chant, right? It's truth. When we come together, there's something beautiful that is able to arise and emerge. Power with has foundations rooted in respect, in shared power and mutual support, in solidarity, in influence, in empowerment. And it really is about collaborative decision making. It doesn't really focus on one person being more powerful, but sees everyone as powerful in their own right. Now, there might still be hierarchy with titles, but the way that that's played out and lived is different. It's focused really on collective action rather than domination. It's based on dialogue, listening, right? Really listening, inclusion, who is present? Do we have diverse voices and do they know that they belong here? Negotiation, going back and forth and being able to handle conflict between different perspectives, different ways of seeing a situation, and shared decision making, people power. We're gathering people together to all utilize all of our power, creates more power for everyone, for our organizations, and for society. So with power with, there's compassion here that is not really as available in power over dynamics. Here, diverse viewpoints are listened to and upheld as valid. With power over, there's often like the person whose idea is valid. And then if you kind of don't fit in with that, sometimes you are just dismissed or, not really listened to or invalidated, right? Here, power with, everyone has a voice and every perspective is valid. Here also, lived experiences are seen as a form of expertise, often with things like power over and even with white supremacy culture in general, we see expertise as being, you got these certifications, you got these degrees, and therefore you're an expert. So someone who just got their degree and studied for maybe 4 years can be seen more as expert than someone who has been doing the work in the community, in an organization for 20 years. Power with says, oh, those lived experiences, we're going to listen to those. Those are completely valid and need to be upheld. It's also based in shared resources and access to resources when people need them. Social capital and financial capital. There's no hoarding, no like funneling away, no micromanaging, and no controlling. And there doesn't have to be, because there's a shared governance, there's a shared way that comes up, that arises with power with. And this is where people who have societal privilege are actively, just need to, but are actively doing the work to acknowledge their privilege and to make sure it's not what they lead with. With power with, when people lead with their privilege, it creates imbalances in power. It creates power struggles. And that's not what power with is about. So there's actively dismantling that and making sure that the mic gets to the people who have been marginalized due to their identities. I know that sometimes people talk about like giving a voice to the voiceless. And I think about it like giving, passing the mic to people who have been systemically and systematically silenced. And there's a difference between though. I don't believe people are voiceless. And if you believe people are voiceless, then that's also a way of power over and dismissing their power. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. It's important to understand here with power with, what is your sphere of influence? And when I talk about that, I don't just mean who you impact, but also who is impacting you. Are you only looking to people who have more power than you or are wealthier than you? Are you listening to people who have marginalized identities? Are you listening to people who aren't millionaires and don't want to be, but are so intentional about creating beautiful lives? Do you find those voices, those perspectives to have validity and credibility. Over the past year, since I've really been on my own like decolonial anti-racist journey for myself, the books that I read, the podcasts that I listen to have changed. I used to listen to the people who were like really wealthy white guys, like they have the answer, right? Because they're where I'm supposed to be as this powerful person that I am. And then I realized that they're not checking in around their blind spots. I realized that they can't speak to my situation. They can't speak to the barriers that I face just from being a Black woman. And they're not trying to speak to those. They're not even trying to understand those. So I realized that what they can actually offer me isn't as true as what I believed it was. What I believed it was is something a little bit different, which was hard, but my bookcase looks different and who I am is different in a beautiful way, in a really, really beautiful way. So I want you to ask yourself a few questions, and I'll also put them in the chat again. Give me a second for that. All right, meeting group chat. Few questions here. How is power shared within the organization, or is it? Are there opportunities for collaboration that give space for everyone to bring their whole selves rather than having to send their representative? If you've ever gone on a job interview, you may have sent your representative. If sometimes you feel like you have to paint a smile when you walk into the office, you may be sending your representative. That's what I mean when I say that. What stops more collaborative work from feeling enlivening or invigorating? And why then do you think that this dynamic is at place? What would you change about it? We're going to move on to the next type of power. And this is one that I think is really, really potent. This is power two. Power two is creative power. It's prophetic power. This is the potential that we all have to shape our world, to make a difference, to create something new, to achieve goals. This is generative power. This is possibility. This is actions that lead to something different, to creation, to whatever we want to do without domination, without coercion. This power is the magic of knowing that you're part of something and that you get to play a distinct, unique role in shaping a collective that you yourself get to with your vision, with your skills, with your talents, with your identity. Power two is often stifled by power over, which limits imagination and creativity. Power over often demands that we fit into a specific box. Power over tells us who we have to be, who we need to be, who we are in a lot of ways. But power two is the opportunity to co-create. It's the opportunity for innovation. Now, I think it's important to ask yourself, when was the last time that you felt this kind of power in your life as a human being? But then when was the last time you felt it within your organization? What was happening? Who was involved? Or maybe you realize, I haven't really felt this kind of juice, this kind of creative power, this kind of magic where we're working together to create a vision. Maybe you realize you haven't really experienced that. So the last type of power that we're going to cover is power within. And this is self-empowerment. Another thing that's often squelched down when power over is the focus. When people cannot be fully themselves, it's really hard to tap into that internal power that we have. And when I know that I have power within, I show up with vitality. I show up excited. I show up knowing that I'll be able to utilize my power to create something that impacts the organization, the society, something that's going to get me out of bed. And this power within is our sense of self-worth. It's our sense of self-knowledge, right? It's autonomy. It's about our agency. Here, we recognize our individual differences while respecting others, right? We have our innate sense of our capacity. We believe in our own sovereignty. We trust in our own integrity, which is really like being who we know ourselves to be, like living who we know ourselves to be, rather than just like having some kind of ideal and not doing anything to reach that, right? Here we trust that we can show up, that we're in tune with what we want and we need. And here we're driven by purpose. Power within says that my power comes from the fact that I exist, not because I hold societal privilege, not because I hold a title, not because I've somehow have like an underdog story and I've overcome something, but because I am. Because I am powerful because I am. You are powerful because you are. And power within is supported, of course, by supervisors, coworkers, and is fueled by an atmosphere, by an environment where everyone can be fully themselves and is celebrated. You know, I remember the first time I heard someone say, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And we have to actually know our inner power to be able to choose places where we're going to be celebrated. If we don't know ourselves, if we don't feel that power, if we're not cultivating that self-love, it's going to be hard for us to know the true power that we have. I say that anti-racism is a self-love journey, because when we're not cultivating this sense of love within ourselves and our sense of self, all we're doing when we're supporting other people, or if we, you know, if we say Black Lives Matter, but we hate ourselves, we're just like projecting, and our love is performative. So the power within is something that is already there that we get to reclaim, and then we get to cultivate within ourselves. It's the power no one can take away. Others can only affirm it, or others can create systems and structures where it's affirmed, but others can also create systems and structures where it's invalidated. But that doesn't remove it. It's present within who we are, because who we are is powerful. Power within can be cultivated within an organization when it actually affirms the unique talents of the people within it and gives them opportunities to build their skills and to develop. It creates opportunities for people to grow in their leadership. I've worked with many organizations and within many organizations who are afraid of that, who are afraid, oh my gosh, if they get this experience, if they develop this talent, this skill, then they're going to leave. They're going to go off somewhere else. But what if we trust that people, if they know that they're going to be celebrated, that we can actually help them grow in their leadership? Because maybe they'll stay if they know that there's a place here for that leadership. Often people leave when they're not really feeling like they have an opportunity to grow, or like they, you know, people aren't taking them seriously. But if you're that kind of organization, if you're that kind of leader who says like, yeah, I see this in you and I want you to be you. I want you to be the best you that you can be. I want you to develop in these ways that are important to you at the core of who you are, not just something so that you can do something better in this organization. Then that creates a sense of loyalty that's really, really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. What are some ideas around what you can do? You as an individual, you as a collective, you within your organization, to cultivate more power to right? The inspirational power with this beautiful collaborative power, and power within, this power that no one can take away, power that maybe you can work on creating space and structure that it can be affirmed. Examining power dynamics can feel tricky sometimes. We're going to wrap up the lesson in just a second and go into some like Q&A and processing. But I do want to say that it can feel tricky, especially if you hold a lot of power, because I mentioned earlier that power over gives you blind spots. It changes your brain and gives you blind spots. When you are realizing that you have held your power in a way that has maybe marginalized or oppressed another person, or because of your blind spots, it can kick up a sense of shame. When you realize other people don't have the same opportunities as you because of their identity, it can kick up a sense of like, oh no, something's wrong with me. And in our society, we're not really taught how to process shame. There's no overarching cultural context around shame besides that it makes us smaller, like we should be small because of it and hide in a corner, or it gets us to avoid things. Now, shame might come up as you examine power, but what also comes up when shame is present is an opportunity to reconnect with parts of your humanity that may have been hidden from you. Shame is always pointing us to something. Often, shame is pointing us to, wow, I missed how much something mattered to another person. Or I really wanted to be seen in a good light, and I have done something that is not cultivating me being seen in that light. And that's just part of our humanity. So as you move forward, and I hope that you continue this conversation within your organizations, I just want to remind us all that shame is not an identity. Shame is an experience. And it's an experience that points us back to the fact that we really actually are connected with one another. That there is no individualism it's a lie. It's a lie. Our interconnectedness is the truest part of who we are. So as we're moving forward, I want you to think about a few things. If you have positional power, I really want you to examine the hierarchy, the social privilege, societal privilege dynamics, the power over dynamics within the organization. And I want you to partner with people who are below you. You are awesome, I'm sure, but you have blind spots. Blind spots don't mean you're a bad person. That's okay. Let them show you what you're missing. You want to know, are people really empowered? Are people coming to work feeling like, yes, I can make a difference? Or are they just showing up and clocking in, doing what they need to do and leaving? Ask yourself what policies and procedures might need to change in ways that inspire power within, that inspire power to, power with, and that help people maintain their full sense of self and autonomy. There also might need to be salary changes. There might need to be salary changes. That might need to be an important conversation of how you move forward. Now, maybe you're in a position that doesn't hold hierarchical power. That does not mean that you don't have any. We talked about all these kinds of power that don't have anything to do with position. I want you to tap in to the deepest part of yourself that has a voice, that can speak truth, that can suggest change. Do you know what it looks to utilize your influence? Do you even know who you influence? There's this thing called managing up. People who are at the mid-level, they're often supervising and then managing up. Managing up is a skill to develop. It's understanding, actually, the role that I do is really important. And I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that the people who might be over me, who maybe don't see it, I'm going to make sure that they do. I'm going to make sure that they see that this is something that they have maybe overlooked, that they have overstepped, that they have just have blind spots around. They can't see it, but I can. So how can you use your voice? What does it look like for you to be in that creation mode, to do something that will impact the organization? I believe that if you're there, that you matter. If you're there, that you matter. And every person has a part in reshaping the dynamics within the organization. And so it's not just top down, it's also bottom up. Where can you hold on to, reclaim and hold on to more of your power?